couple of days ago, we did a video about how the Star Wars MCU was coming. And although we went into great detail within that video, a lot of the comments were people confused about certain aspects of what we were talking about. So I want to clarify what I meant in that video about the Star Wars MCU that is coming. What's up, everybody? It's Josh. Welcome back to the channel. Do me a favor and use those force powers of yours to smash the like button. And let's get right into this. So it's been a couple of days since that Star Wars video that we released on Star Wars Sunday came out, talking all about how Star Wars was doing its MCU. But I saw a lot of confusion in the comments section, and so I literally wanted to address all of the different points that people are bringing up with on that video and really just clarify what I mean, because I know it's a confusing thing. I thought we were pretty clear about what I meant in the video, but there's way too much confusion in the comment section for that to actually be the case. We must have not been crystal clear about it, so allow me now to bring up some of these points that people have and fully explain what's going on. Okay, so first up, it's not going to be called the Star Wars MCU. They're not going to literally come out and say, hey, it's our Star Wars MCU. And they're not even going to call it probably the Star Wars CU or whatever. They might not even use the terminology of a cinematic universe. It really has more to do with the structure of their films, how their films are going to release and tie together. And that is going to be modeled after what the MCU has done. Like, the biggest difference is that there's not going to be trilogies. There's not going to be a trilogies of films. We're not going to be following the same protagonist and antagonist through 3 different movies that have like a first, second, and third act. Instead of what we've been getting with Star Wars, imagine something like the MCU's first phase, where you get a Captain America movie, you get an Iron Man movie, you get a Hulk movie, and you get a Thor movie, and then you get an Avengers movies. That is more like what the model will be for the future Star Wars movies. So as an example, you might get a young Yoda movie. You might get a movie focused on some of these Sith gods and maybe some of the Sith that are surviving and lingering, like maybe disciples of Darth Bane, maybe Darth Tenebris, maybe Darth Plagueis. I think we could potentially get a movie about Tar Vizsla, who is the first Mandalorian Jedi. So like, think of it like this. In 2022, what if we get a young Yoda movie? And maybe that young Yoda movie focuses on one story where he is with a group of Jedi exploring some of the then unknown regions of the galaxy. But then in a post-credit scene, we see these secret Sith. We see Darth Tenebris. We see how they're connecting things. Maybe we even see the Sith gods. And then in 2024, what if we get our Tar Vizsla movie, right? We get this movie about this Mandalorian and how he is force sensitive, but he has no training in anything like that, right? And his battle, and perhaps he even meets up with the Sith at the end of that movie. And then possibly the next film could be a scenario in which Tar Vizsla is recruited into the Jedi Order, possibly even by a young Yoda, and then Yoda and Tar Vizsla and the Mandalorians and the Jedi work together to extinguish the Sith gods. So it's like that, where you have like the singular movies that then tie together, and then you get a bigger movie. It's going to be a series of movies, not a trilogy. I expect that there could be big event films. I think there will be sort of tying of these movies together, but they're not all strictly going to follow the trilogy format, and they're not all going to be the same characters. We will get different movies focusing on different characters. And this goes beyond what we'll even see in the films. This has to do with the shows, the Disney Plus stuff, the comics, and the animated series. All of this stuff is going to be separate, but it's all going to connect to a singular canon, the same way that the MCU did. But that's the first point I wanted to clarify, because I saw so many comments about people being like, they're not going to call it the MCU. They better not call it a Star Wars MCU. That's a stupid name. They should call it the Star Wars Cinematic Universe. And to be honest with you, I don't think they're going to call it anything. My point in bringing up the MCU is that that is the best comparison. It is something that Lucasfilm for sure wants to model after. It's one of the most successful things ever to happen in cinema. So they're not going to call it an MCU, an SWCU, or anything like that. It's just going to be the new Star Wars, but it is going to follow the pattern of the MCU. The next confusing thing that I think people were struggling with this video was this idea that it's already a cinematic universe, that Star Wars already has a cinematic universe. And I saw a lot of people sort of espousing this attitude of, oh, this will be just like the sequel trilogy, therefore I hate it. Okay, this is going to be very different from the sequel trilogy, and it's going to be very different than anything that was Star Wars before. You see, Star Wars actually was creating its canon as it went along. There's a very fascinating example of this, and it was actually the beginning of the extended universe. There was a book called Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and that book was supposed to be a sequel to the first Star Wars movie. And at the time, that book had a lot of romance between Luke and Leia, and that book was later retconned because George retroactively decided to make Luke and Leia related. That's not the way it was going to be in the first movie. It's just an idea he came up with, and therefore that was established in the second movie, and that became the canon. And the sequel trilogy was trying to replicate that, actually. They were trying to do it the way George did, where they were like, okay, here's the start of the story. Now we're going to let Ryan take the second part of this story and do what he wants to do, and then we will figure out the third part of the story from there. They were replicating the way George had done it before. So no, it's not a cinematic universe. It is cinema that's telling a story, and then there is a universe behind it, a canon behind it. Basically, Star Wars has always let the trilogy dictate the era rather than have the era or the canon dictate the trilogy. That's just the big difference there. And frankly, guys, it's just really frustrating to like see all of these comments that are like, oh, it's going to be like the sequel trilogy, therefore I hate it. I get it. Sequel trilogy had a lot of flaws. I get it. A lot of people don't like Kathy Kennedy. I get it. But what I'm explaining to you is the biggest flaw, the thing that we have agreed as a fan base was the biggest mistake of the sequel trilogy, is the fact that there wasn't a plan. There wasn't a set in stone plan, and they gave too much of a blank slate to these writers and then tried to fit the canon around it. I mean, think about it. That's why the Star Wars comic book started out in between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. There has not really been any new canon stuff, even in the ancillary material, that is revolving around the sequel trilogy, talking about what happened in the 30 years after Return of the Jedi to The Force Awakens. And the reason was because they didn't have it fully figured out. They were allowing the writers of the trilogy and those movies to create that time period, and then they would retroactively fill in the gaps with the ancillary material. That is totally the opposite of what the MCU does. That is not the way that Marvel has created what they have created, and Star Wars is learning from their mistakes. But for the new Star Wars MCU, they're going to figure out the era. They're going to actually have the canon established, the era established, and then writers and creators of shows, films, comics, and novels will have to fit their ideas very nicely and neatly within that established canon. So you see, it's just totally different than what the sequel trilogy was. The sequel trilogy was not, oh, hey, you can tell your story, but it has to fit into here. It was more like, hey, tell your story and we'll figure out how it all fits together, which was ultimately a mistake. Now, the next confusing thing that was in the Sunday video, the thing that people are getting wrong, is this idea that the new Star Wars MCU is going to be like Marvel-like, with Marvel humor, with sort of Marvel watered down characters, watered down violence. There's this idea that some people don't like what's going on in Marvel right now because it's too Disneyfied, it's too safe, it's too cookie cutter. And if I somehow gave that impression on the video on Sunday that is what Lucasfilm is looking to do, then I apologize. That is not what I meant at all. Star Wars has a completely different vibe than Marvel, and they are not looking to take the Marvel vibe and bring it over to Star Wars movies. It has more to do with the production, and it has more to do with the planning. It is not marveling the Star Wars characters. There's not going to be a group of Avengers type characters. They're not going to be quippy. They're not bringing in Robert Downey Jr. to play a Jedi that's essentially Iron Man. Like, I just, it's a little frustrating that people had that idea, but allow me to explain that is not what I was talking about. Star Wars is going to be Star Wars. It has to have that vibe. And even if you hate the sequel trilogy, I think you can at least pick out different scenes or moments or characters that did feel more like Star Wars than other things. Like particularly, I think of The Last Jedi. I think of some things in there that did feel very Star Wars, and then I think of some things that didn't feel Star Wars, like the throwing the saber, you know, the milk thing, and then the mom joke. Like, to me, that's a little too far Marvel-y for me, and I can see why people would be concerned that that's what I meant when I said this. That is not what I meant. It's going to be Star Wars. It's going to have its Star Wars vibe. It's just going to be more carefully planned. And I want to end on something that'll get me so much hate in the comments section. Here we go. I know people have problems with Kathy Kennedy, and I get it. Trust me, I do. I know a lot of things about what's going on behind the scenes, but I do think Kathy gets a very unfair rep. And I think that in some ways, a lot of the problems of the sequel trilogy lie more at the feet of Bob Iger and Alan Horn and the people at Disney than they do at Lucasfilm. Disney and those overlords were like, hey, we need a movie now. We need to push this out now. We're holding to these street dates. And literally, Kathy and a lot of people close to her realized that that was a mistake. And they started planning for the next thing, the thing that they really wanted to be executed properly years ago. Years ago. This is years in the making. And the reason some of these announcements are being delayed, the reason we aren't hearing some things that maybe we should be hearing is because they are fighting for that quality. They are pushing against Disney and saying, no, we need time to figure this out. And so, look, I'm not the biggest fan of Kathy. I've said many times I think she should step down, and I do think she should step down. At this point, though, it's more of a PR thing than her actually being bad at her job, because I don't think she's as bad at her job as a lot of you people think she is, but whatever, that's your prerogative. What I'm saying to you is that it's crazy to me that people are going to get so upset and just discount this new thing, say, hey, this is not what we want, this is not going to work, when the biggest problem with the sequel trilogy was clearly that it was not properly planned out, that they didn't have a fully fleshed out plan, and that they didn't have perfect entry points and connective tissue between the ancillary stuff and the movies. I get it, guys. I get it. I gave them a C+ for the sequel trilogy. That's the score on the report card. I, of course, want things to be better. And what I'm telling you is everything that I am hearing about what they are doing seems like they are fixing up all of the problems. Of course, if it's executed poorly, I will sit back and say, yes, that was poor execution. And even though I love Rise of Skywalker and I like a lot of the sequel trilogy, I still gave it a C+. I still recognize the problems. It's not the greatness that we as Star Wars fans deserve. But what I'm telling you is this next phase, what I am calling the Star Wars MCU, does give me a lot of hope. I am pumped for it, and it seems like it's going to fix all of the big problems we had with the first phase of Disney Star Wars films. But that's it, guys. That's the thing I wanted to clarify. I saw a lot of confusion about the video on Sunday. I get it. I get that people are confused. I hope this clarifies what I meant for you, and I hope this gives you a better picture of what I'm actually talking about when I say the words Star Wars MCU. So let me know what you're thinking. Did this help? Did this not help? Where are you at with all of this? Who knows? Maybe we'll even do more responses to this video again. And now I want to shout out Chris Caldwell. Indeed, Darth Tenebris was the master of Darth Plagueis in Star Wars Legends. So shout out to you, Chris. And now let's ask another nerd card question before we get out of here. I want to know how many engines are on an X-Wing? That's right, a Star Wars ship question. How many of those engines are on an X-Wing? Answer that question in the comment section below. As I always say, I hope you're having an awesome and a nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video.